An Islam that engages Western values and institutions, engages and critiques, but does not reject. I'm just going to mention two of its most important books, Western Muslims and the Future of Islam, published by Oxford University Press in 2004, and the recently released In the Footsteps of the Prophet, Lessons from the Life of Muhammad, also published by Oxford. Why can't Tariq Ramadan be with us here today, physically? We don't really know for sure. About to assume a professorship at the University of Notre Dame in the year 2004, when the State Department revoked his visa under the ideological exclusion provision of the Patriot Act, and without any further elaboration. Almost 3 years have passed since then. There are ongoing legal battles, accusations, counter-accusations, speculation. I'd argue we still don't have a clear and convincing rationale, or a clear or convincing rationale for the U.S. decision. I don't want to go into the visa controversy in any detail. I would point you to the page we've dedicated to it on the Berkeley Center website. The idea behind this event, this series of conversations, was to shift the focus away from the visa controversy to Tariq Ramadan's ideas.
That's correct.
If we're serious about West Islamic dialogue,
Right. Well,
and this is one of the priorities of the Berkeley Center, Georgetown University, if we're serious about West Islamic dialogue, we have to listen to the world's most influential Muslim voices. Tariq Ramadan is one of those voices. We can question, we can criticize, we can even dismiss, but before we do, we should listen. Fortunately, today, face-to-face dialogue is not an option. I guess this is face-to-face dialogue in a way. But with the help of a couple of satellites, we'll be able to engage you, Tariq, in your ideas, and take part in an extended conversation. Today, the topic that you've agreed to talk about is Islam and democracy. The way this will work is we've asked you to speak for 45 minutes or so. At 25 past the hour, we'd like to transition to question and answer period. I don't want to be rude and cut you off, but I think it's important that we do have time for direct engagement with the audience. Some people have posted questions online. Many of you have collected index cards on your way in. We'd ask you to fill those out, and some members of my staff will be coming to the aisles. You can pass the questions you have along to them. I will take them, and at about 25 past the hour, begin passing these questions on to Tariq, and we can deepen our conversation at that point. So again, thank you for joining us, and we look very much forward to hearing your ideas.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for, first, really, thank you for this invitation. I'm not able to be with you in Washington, and I'm sad about it. But I want really to thank you personally and the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs for this support. I will not forget the fact that during these last years I got a strong support from Georgetown University about my case. I was prevented from entering your country with no reason, as you said earlier, and I got support from so many people. Georgetown University with Notre Dame University, John Esposito, and the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding were supporting, as well as ACLU, AAR, and the American Organization of University Professors, and PEN. And for that, I want to thank you, because it's really important for me not to confuse the current administration with the American people, with the universities, and with the people who want today to engage into demanding but necessary dialogue for us for the future, knowing that what is going on in the West will have a tremendous impact on the relationship between what we call the West and the Islamic world, the Islamic majority countries. And one of these topics is really the relationship between Islam and democracy, because what we heard is that there is no way of reconciling the two, concepts, or the two dimensions, or the two universes of reference. So what I want to do, and once again, I will respond to your questions that will help me to go further into details, but in 45 minutes it's quite difficult to have a very exhaustive picture, but at least the main points that we have to tackle and that we have to understand when it comes to this discussion. What I want to do is a short introduction with 3 main points referring to the state of the debate in our history, but also the contemporary challenges in this discussion. And the first part will be something dealing with the theoretical approach, the main points, the overall discussion, the theoretical discussion about the Islamic principles, the relationship between these principles and the principles of democracy and the models of democracy, and to come to a better understanding where lie the problems, if problems we are facing, which is for me something which sometimes is much more about the way we put the question, we put the problem in front of us, much more than the reality of our understanding of a deep understanding. And then I will come to a discussion about contemporary issues and in which way we have to come to a critical debate, because if we are all promoting democracy, we should not be naive by promoting only the principles and forgetting that even in our democracies in the West we still have to promote a critical approach, not to forget the model of democracy, but also the conditions to get the democracies we want and the right way of promoting it in our societies. So let me start with this short introduction, 3 main points that are important to start with. The first thing that I wanted to say is that once again, Islam and democracy is an old discussion, and the way we are putting it, and this is why I accepted from the very beginning that the way you put it, which is Islam and democracy, because it's really starting from our perception. Really, very often we have this idea that yes, okay, Islam is on one side and democracy is on the other side, and we have two monolithic entity or concepts that are maybe conflicting, or at least they are not the same, are not the same origins. And I think that it's really important in these kind of discussions to go from the perception and to deconstruct the perceptions to come to a deeper understanding of what is at stake and what we are talking about. First, there is nothing like Islam with a monolithic entity. We have, yes, Islam is one religion, a set of principles, a set of practices which are common for all the Muslims. But at the same time, when it comes to our understanding of the social construction, the social project, the political project, we have trends, understandings, readings. So the books of reference, the Quran and the Islamic tradition, the prophetic tradition, what we call the Ahadith and the Sunnah, are many, and there are many readings here, and you cannot just say Islam and democracy, because from within the Islamic trends you will have different readings, and some are completely opposed, and that this is a reality to something which is a non-Islamic concept. Democracy is a Greek concept coming from outside our universe of reference, so we refuse it, and you have this kind of reading. But you have other readings that are completely different, and they go beyond the concept to understand the content. And we have in Arabic a phrase which is representing this, al-ibratu bil-musammayat la bil-asma, meaning by that the content of the discussion is not in the names and the concept, but in the content, the substance of the concepts. And this is really the start of our discussion. On the other side, when it comes to democracy, it's as if we have one model of democracy, or we refer to something, and very often the people are referring to models of democracy, not distinguishing between the principles of democracy and the models of democracy. And here again, we are dealing with a very complex reality, and there is no democracy or model of democracy not connected to a specific nation. And meaning by that, a nation means a collective psychology, it means a culture, it means a memory. And this is why we have, and I will come back to this later, we have different models of democracy, even though we accept that there are common principles. So we have also to come to a better understanding of the complexity of the democratic process, which is not absolute but is historical. Once again, principles may be universal and trans-historical, but the models are historical and should be put in a specific context and realities. This is the first point. The second point, which is also really important, is that the classical views on this is that we have, coming from the concept of democracy, the West. So on one side we have whatever are the diverse models, it's still something which is coming from the West. And on the other side we have for Islam a concept which is different, which is specific, which is shura. Shura meaning consultation, and a way which is connected to the prophetic tradition, and the concept is in the Quran. So on one side we have democracy, which is coming from the West, and maybe, or we can understand, there is something which is not exactly similar, but something which is an Islamic concept, which is shura. And we had in the during the 19th century, and the first one to do this was Jamaluddin al-Afghani, when he had his first talk in Turkey in 1870. He was talking about this, referring to ijtihad and shura as something which is the way to resist colonization. So we have our own concept, we have our own terminology, we have our own models, resisting what is called democracy, or the democratic process coming from the West, but used at that time by the colonizing power. So this classical discussion, we have to restudy the fundamentals and the roots of this discussion, because it was also something which went through all the Islamic tradition, referring to what was the West, and in the Western tradition saying this is what we have, this is what we have promoted, democracy is a Western product, and the Muslims are resisting, or if they are moderate, they have to accept it as it is. And I think that this perception of, these conflicting concepts, meaning conflicting references, conflicting principles, is wrong, and we have really to deconstruct the whole thing. We have someone who during the 70s and the 80s, not knowing exactly what to say between democracy and between shura. It was Mahfouz Nahnah. He was the leader of the Islamist movement in Algeria. He created a concept to put all of us in agreement, saying it should be shuracracy, meaning by that, so the shura reference and the democracy, and taking the two concepts together. He was just trying to build a bridge. He was not helping us to have a better understanding of the in-depth of the discussion, or at least the principles or the references we were talking about. So there is something here which is really important, because when it comes to this reality between Islam and democracy, between the West and Islam, this kind of construction could help us to have a better understanding that in fact our perception of two worlds, two entities, two monolithic, realities should be reassessed and rediscussed, and come to the deep understanding of the respective tradition or civilizations. The last point here is also something that we have to keep in mind, which is even in the Islamic movements, starting in the end, during the end of the 19th century up to now, in the Islamic majority countries, you had people who evolve in their understanding even of what democracy is all about. Because when you are under colonization and you hear about what is democracy, it has nothing to do with freedom, it has nothing to do with your independence and autonomy. It's something which is okay, it's the concept used by the dominant force, which is totally different when we start talking about it during the independence. And it's now completely different to talk about it in this globalized world. So we also have to understand that within the Islamic tradition, within the Islamic societies, within the Islamic movements, or among the Islamist groups, for example, of movements, the people are moving and changing, and it doesn't mean that they are just, it's not only real politic, it's something which has to do with a better understanding. And by the way, if we look at our discussion on the democratic process, it has also evolved during the last decades within the European or the American or the Western societies. And we also have to deal with this, because the conditions to get a true democracy today are completely, not completely, but quite different, slightly different from the conditions we had yesterday, because now we have new power. It's difficult to speak in the same way about democracy when we are dealing with so powerful media today, because media are shaping opinions. And when we come to talk about democracy, we are speaking about public spheres, we are speaking about civil society, and we are speaking about free choice and the way to express your opinion. And if you can be influenced with a so powerful means, it's also have to deal with in which way we are building a critical awareness citizen in order also to resist the power of the media of today. I will come to this in my conclusion. Having said that, let us come to the overall discussion about what is important in relation to democracy. In fact, when we start discussing about democracy, it's also important to know that there are other essential preliminary questions that we also have to tackle. It's not only a question about the model and principles, it's much more than that. And very often the Muslims in the current discussions are avoiding and not coming to the deep understanding and discussions. What are, for example, I don't have time to go in further details here, but at least we have three main questions that are really important. Because when it comes to democracy, we are speaking about authority, we are speaking about negotiation, we are speaking about a sphere where the people can decide for themselves what they want as a society. So it has to do with the reference, it has to do with the authority. And this is why implicitly in the discussion about democracy, there is a discussion about the relationship between the church and the state, what we call secularism or the secular movement, which was the experience in the Western societies with specific secular model, but the secular process was everywhere. Many Muslims were avoiding the question by saying, look, in Islam there is no church, so we cannot distinguish between state and church because there is no church. In fact, the question is not the church and the state. Beyond the question of church and state, there is a very deep question, which is the relationship between dogma and rationality. Meaning by that the dogma is coming from on high. And here we have the discussion about authority. Who has authority? Who can just say this is right and this is wrong in the political sphere as well as in the social sphere? Meaning that when it comes to the dogma on one side and rationality, when we were talking about the separation between church and state, we were discussing, in fact, the separation between an authority getting his power from on high and something which was a collective negotiation to promote something which was a democratic process, in fact. So people being able to negotiate in order, through a majority process, to get something which is their autonomous decision. So it's also at the third level a discussion about the authority coming from on high or a sphere where there is something which could be negotiated. So when we talk about democracy, we also have to talk about this, the relationship between the dogma and the rationality meaning from an Islamic viewpoint, in which way the Muslim scholars, for example, or the society or the text are playing a role as to define the authority, who get this authority, how, and what is disputable, what is negotiable, where lies the power of the people in building their society. So we cannot only talk about the democratic process in this way or the democratic principles without coming to this deep discussion, which is the relationship between also in the Western experience, secularism, and the distinction between the dogma coming from on high and rationality negotiated from the bottom to the top. So this is something which is an important discussion. It's not the only question. We also have to discuss about, when it comes to democracy and the democratic process, about, for example, in an Islamic majority country, the place of the non-Muslims. Are we talking about, the same status? Are we talking about equal rights and duties and responsibility? What is the place? Having said that, we also have, and this is the third question, about women, for example, because we know that the relation or the status of the women within the very specific religious sphere is something which is discussed among the Muslim scholars. So when it comes to her place within the society, within the public sphere, her role, the possibility for her to be involved is something which is, once again, really important, and we have to talk about it to get a true understanding. Are we speaking about equal rights, or are we speaking about secondary or second-class citizenship? This is something which is really essential. So there is, beyond the question of democracy, a series of questions that are fundamental in order to have a better understanding of what we are talking about. So the second point, which is for me really important, is now to come to the Islamic classical tradition, so to say, and to go beyond that and to try to shape, in fact, the landscape of the current discussion, to know, is there something which is per se intrinsically non-negotiable or in contradiction between what the Islamic principles are or what the Islamic teachings are promoting and what the democratic processes or the democratic ideals are promoting for the society. There's something that I want to say first, which is really important, and it may be better understood in the States than in Europe. In fact, the religious reference is something that it's not a problem per se, but it could become a problem if, for example, in some secular experiences, the opposition to religions was so deep, so constant, so permanent, so conflicting, in fact, so difficult, that for some people the only way to think about the secular model is really the disappearance, a kind of invisible religious belonging for all the citizens. In some society, we have it in France, but we have it in all the European countries, something which is slightly different, not in all the European countries, but it's slightly different from the American experience, because the connection between, the public sphere, the political authority and religions, it's quite different. It's not odd, it's not strange, it's not something which is incredible or unbelievable for an American to have this connection between, God and the religious reference and his or her public commitment to his or her society. And here there is something which is not really specific, but to be understood in the right way. In the Islamic majority countries today, any kind of experiences trying to avoid the religious reference is going to fail. The problem is not the religious reference, it's how do you refer to religion. For example, after 67 years of this secular experience in Turkey, what we got afterward was the coming back of the religious reference through the running party today, and clearly referring to the Islamic tradition or the Islamic principles or the Islamic teachings. So here there is something which is, you cannot avoid this. You cannot in any Islamic majority country is not avoided even in Senegal. Just look at what, just always referring to the Sufi trends there. Look at what is going on in Indonesia. Look at what is going on in all the North African countries and in Egypt. The religious reference is there. So to avoid it, or to try to neglect it, or to remove it from the public scene, is something which is historically, our history is just showing us that it's not working. Now the question is, how could it be right? How could it be better? Not religions to be used for political reason, but a reference helping the democratic process to occur in the right way. So the question is not to neglect or to refuse, is to ask ourselves in which way this could be done in respecting the principles we are talking about, and I'm going to refer to right now. So even look at our situation in Iraq. We were talking about democratization in Iraq, and the British American invasion came to liberate the country, or the so-called liberation, which is not the case now. It's quite a catastrophe, but behind it, it was a democratic process that the two powers wanted. What happened is, once again, from within the country, something came which is a religious reference to resist something which was perceived as an invasion or coming from outside. So the point here is not to dismiss, not to neglect, not to refuse it, because it's not going to happen. There is something which is a clear connection, but how do we build, do we articulate these two universes, which is the religious reference and the public sphere, in which way we can still have a good, a right, a thought and in-depth relationship between the religious reference as a reference, but also giving the society a room to be able to protect the democratic principles. And I think that this is something which is really important. Second point, which is also important when it comes to the Islamic principles, as I said at the beginning, we have different trends. And you have some people who, it's clear, there is no democracy in Islam, and you heard this in Algeria a few years ago during the 80s when Ali Belhaj was saying, tell me where is democracy in the Quran. It's not our terminology, so you refuse it. He was referring to something which is coming from the 60s and the 50s, which was not, in fact, there was a fracture between what we got in jails, in the Egyptian jails during the 60s, when someone like Said Qutb was saying that there are Islamic concepts that are our reference, and there are non-Islamic concepts that are not our reference, and democracy is one of them. So people were refusing this for years and decades in different trends, but some of the literalist trends now, what we call Salafi, wrongly called Wahhabi, which doesn't mean really anything today, because even themselves, they don't call themselves Wahhabi, but it's a media concept accepted within academia, which is quite strange, by the way. But what I wanted to say is here that we have literalists and we have traditionalists saying, for example, intikhabat, elections. This is not a Quranic term, and the Prophet of Islam never used this, so it's not Islamic. So we have trends refusing democracy, the concept, the model, and the project. This is a reality. You cannot avoid this, or you cannot just deny it as a fact. Now, the mainstream among the Muslims and the Muslim scholars today are coming from the reformist tradition. In fact, at the center of their consideration is a concept which is ijtihad, which is the critical reading of the sources, going from the understanding of the text and the context, which is something which is everywhere. By the way, let us repeat that this is the mainstream Islamic strand everywhere, in the States, in Europe, in the West, as well as in all the Islamic majority countries. The literalists and the traditionalists are still a minority when it comes to think about the social and political project. So here we have in the mainstream something which is really important, and it comes to the first question I ask as one of the preliminary questions. to be able to say what about democracy in the Islamic majority countries or as to the Islamic teachings. And here there is something which is really important, is that in this majority trend, the mainstream trend here, the reformist one, are coming also from all the schools of law. And when I speak about this, we can put the Hanbali, the Shafi'i, the Ja'fari, the Maliki, and the Hanafi all together. There is something which is from the very beginning. When it comes to the readings of the sources, in all the classical books of fiqh, law and jurisprudence, we find something which is a distinction between what we call al-ibadat wal-mu'amalat. Al-ibadat is worship, is here in this field, when it comes to the Islamic practices, two things, two spheres are connected to the ibadat. First, there is something which is beyond the ibadat, which is al-aqidah, the creed for the Muslims. And the ibadat are the Islamic practices. In these two fields, you cannot do but what is written. So there is something which is the text is the reference. So your rationality here is not really working. It's working to understand the text, but you have to rely on the text to know what you have to do. So you pray as it is written, you fast as it is written, and all the rituals in the pilgrimage are done as it is written. On the other side, there is the mu'amalat, social affairs. And here there is a principles, al-aslu fil ashya al-ibaha. The principles in everything in this field is permission. So, in fact, it's exactly the opposite of the first methodology. Here, you can do whatever you want as long as there is no text or something which is a consensus among the scholars that this is forbidden. So here there is a room for rationality, creativity, taking from all the people, and this is why during the first centuries the Muslims were going in Africa, in Asia, and they were taking principles, models, creations, techniques, and everything that they could find at that time, and they were taking it as theirs because the principles here was permission. Nothing was preventing them from integrating it. And this is what I call the universal principle of integration, to integrate what is good, whatever is the producer, whoever is the producer, or from wherever it's coming. So there is something here which is essential in this. So from the very beginning, if it comes to the Islamic tradition, this idea that in Islam there is a great confusion between politics and religion, that we are confusing everything. When we come to the true Islamic classical tradition, we understand that no, there are references to everything, but the methodologies are completely different. Here, this is what we would call in Christian terms the dogma. What is coming, and this is imposed onto your rationality or your reason or your intellect from on high or from the texts. But here there is a room for rationality, negotiation, and understanding among the people. Yes, there are limits, but you are inspired. There is a direction, and you have to build everything. This is up to the human intellect to understand the direction, the limits, the ethics, and then you have to build the social project, because there is no social project, there is no one social or political model. These are only what you have to extract from the prophetic experience are principles and not the model. And this is, for example, the great discussion I could have with some literalists and some traditionalists, telling them, look, I don't want to recreate today the Medinian model. This is just impossible, is against any kind of rational or reasonable approach. But what I can do is to come back to this historical experience, extract the principles, and try to find a way to implement the principles for my time, and to try to find the right model, because it's an ongoing process, a dialectical process between the text and the context, and this is what we have to promote. having said that, and coming back to the prophetic tradition now, or the prophetic experience, when he came to Medina and he tried to build this society, and we spoke about, you know, in all the classical books, you have this Medinian constitution or this legal framework and what he tried to do. When you extract on that field, on the field of mu'amalat, where everything is possible as long as it is not prohibited, you come with something which is really interesting as to the 5 fundamental principles, helping us to build the social project. And once again, I said this because it's really important. The religious reference is here. It's very important it's to know how it is here, as a dogmatic imposition or as an inspiration. And I think that the way it should be understood in the mu'amalat field, the social affairs field, is really a way to inspire the people, to give them guidance and ethics and principles to respect. And then you have to find out of your own, you know, intelligence, understanding of the context, realities, challenges, economic challenges, political challenges. You have to find your model. But 5 principles are indisputable. The first one is rule of law, which is important. The first Islamic science is not theology. We don't have really an Islamic theology. We don't have a discourse on God, because we rely on what God is saying about himself. But we have something which is a legal field, where it's the first Islamic science, in fact. Here there is something which is sending us a message between me and any kind of human beings, and even non-human beings, with nature, for example. There is something which is a legal relation, a kind of contract. Contract is a central concept in Islam. It came later in the philosophical European or Western tradition, but contract is something which is the beginning of your relation with God, your relation with your fellow human beings, your relation with nature, your relation with everything. It's a moral sometimes, it's a written sometimes, it's a kind of, even it's a love contract when it comes to marriage, for example. It's just to set the scene, to help you to live what you have to live in the best conditions possible. But there is something which is essential in our understanding. First, rule of law. Second, equal citizenship. And there we come back to what the Prophet did, and in the Medinian period, speaking about the Jews and saying, for example, لَهُمْ مَا لَنَا وَعَلَيْهِمْ مَا عَلَيْنَا. They have the same rights and the same duties as us, and they are part. Look at this, it's really important, where we have all this discussion today about the meaning of ummah. Hum min ummatina. They are part of our community. They are among members of us. Here, there is something that if we had to take or to use the contemporary concept, we would say equal citizenship. It was equal membership. At that time, it's equal status and equal citizenship. It's something which is really essential to promote and to understand, extracting these principles from a historical experience. The third one is universal suffrage, and this is something which is really important. The majority process was experienced even with the Prophet. He was coming with the book of God, and at the same time, when he has to take a political or a military decision, he was just talking to the people and following the majority decision. And it happened that he was in the minority group and he followed the majority. So there is something which is a principle of consultation, and this is the meaning of shura, the majority process. So universal suffrage in our in the way we talk about it today is something which is not anachronical. It's really something that we can refer to. The fourth one, which is also something really important, is accountability. So when you are elected and you have some authorities, just to be elected with no duties towards the people who are electing you. In many of our countries of origin, I'm always saying this, coming from Egypt, but these countries where you are elected with these people who love you so much that you are electing you, 99.8% of all the people electing, and these people are democratically elected for life. And this is the problem we are facing. Accountability is that you have a mandate, you have through which we can just assess your competence and the fact that you have done the job or not. And this is something which is was said by Abu Bakr, saying to his people when he was elected, if I am right, support me, if I am wrong, redirect me, meaning by that there is a critical discussion between the elected and the electors. So there is something which is very important here. And there is a fifth principle connected once again to the secular discussion that we had in the West, which is separation of power, because something which is really important. If you come to the very old classical tradition, you will see that many Muslim scholars, the great majority of the Muslim scholars, were not willing to be part of the executive power. They didn't want to be there. They want to be autonomous, because they were very critical. And at the same time, the judiciary field should be exactly the same. And this was something which was really important during the Ali, for example, caliphate. This was independence, and the Omar caliphate at the same time. So it's really important here to understand this separation of power. It's not something which is completely new or completely in opposition with the Islamic tradition. And I'm not saying new things, by the way. This is as old as the Islamic tradition. Now we have to understand that at some point of our history it was much more or less respected, more or less promoted. Sometimes it came, dynasties were promoted, which at the beginning of the Islamic history was exactly the opposite, that the Sunni were promoting. So there is something here which is really important, is not to have a monolithic reading of history. Is really to understand that what was at stake at different moments and why it happened that way. Having said that, I think it's important for us to understand that these principles are universal. There is no problem from an Islamic viewpoint to deal with them because they are rooted. So the question is, they have to inspire a political project. And here, it's not a dogmatic imposition of these principles, because these principles are exactly in opposition which could be understood as dogmatic. They are helping within the mu'amalat field, something which is a field for more negotiation, for more deliberation, for helping the people to be part of the process. So here we have these principles, and what should be promoted from here, it's the models helping the people to respect. So there is no way to compromise on these principles. But now it's also really important to understand that for these principles to be implemented in every single society, they have to respect some of the conditions. Because you cannot just implement principles without understanding the contextual conditions. And here it comes to understand memory, to understand languages, to understand collective psychology. And this is why, for example, in Europe or even in the States, you travel around and you see that the British system is not the French system, it's not the Italian system, it's not. Why is it so? The same principles are applied, but the models are different. Why? Because the principles are universal, but the models, meaning by that the implementation of these principles are historical, are connected to a memory, to a culture, to a collective psychology that we have to respect. And this should be exactly the same in the Islamic majority countries. We have to understand, for example, in Iraq, but for example also everywhere in the Islamic majority countries, that you have to connect this to in fact the culture and the memory, the legacy of a specific nation, and to take this into account. Not to do, for example, what we heard in China. Because of our culture, we're not going to respect human rights. No, this is not acceptable. Human rights and the rights are universal. But you have to take into account the culture in the limits of implementing the principles. So we cannot compromise on principles because of culture or because of, there is something. The culture should help to implement in the right way, in a specific context, the principles, but it doesn't mean that we can compromise on the principles because there is something which could be a cultural feature, not respecting, for example, the rights of the people. And this is the deep discussion we can have in India with the castes, for example, where some of the people are not considered at the same level as others. And here we have this discussion, and this is something which is really important in our discussion when it comes to, for example, women. We had very long discussions among the Muslim scholars from Tabari through Shafi'i, Ibn Hanbal, Ibn Taymiyyah, and Al-Shatibi, and other great scholars, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, speaking about the status of women. And some were saying, for example, that as to their participation in the political process, because they made the bay'ah, allegiance to the Prophet at the beginning, it means that they have exactly the same rights and the same duty, meaning by that they can be involved in the political and social project. But the discussion was, and what about authority? Could a woman be a president, for example? And we have one hadith, one prophetic tradition, saying that a nation within which a woman is going to be the leader is going to collapse, and we are using this prophetic tradition to say, no, it's not possible for a woman to be a leader. This single, in fact, hadith was disputed, and some were saying no, and then some scholars were saying about distinguishing the levels. We are speaking about the highest qualified. It doesn't mean the president of a nation. And some were saying no, it's the president of a nation, but she can be a minister. I think that out of this we have to be critical on this and to say, if we are speaking about equal rights for men and women, the political process to be elected, to elect and to be elected is something which these are rights protected and promoted for women, are promoted and protected by the Islamic tradition, and the place of the women within the Muslim society as to the public sphere should be open to be elected, and to elect and to be elected, and to play a role at every level of the society. And here, once again, the discussion between, the more traditionalists, the more literalists, the more and the reformists is something which is an ongoing discussion here. I think that we have to take this into account today. So these are problem that we have to take into account. 2 points, and I will end because my time is quite over, but two points which are really interesting in our discussion here that I wanted to add. When it comes to the model, it's just really to understand that we are promoting principles, and that we have to say, no, there is no contradiction between the Islamic teachings and the democratic process. And for that, we should rely from within. And this is why in the West sometimes we are misled by the fact that we want to impose our terminology on processes, and we don't understand the principles and the intrinsic dynamic of a specific religion or a universe of reference, because at the end of the day it's not only a religion. Here we are saying a religion is inspiring the people and giving them principles and ethics, and then they are building intellectually out of their own reference, so the religious reference, cultural reference, national references, and all this kind of thing. This is quite complex, so sometimes we have to decenter ourselves from our own universe of reference, our terminology, and to understand that sometimes the problem is not the concept, but its psychological dimension, because some concepts are loaded. For example, secularism, it was freedom in the West, it was colonization and oppression in Turkey, in Iraq, it means secularization, it means no religion in many of the Islamic majority countries. It doesn't mean, liberation process. So you cannot just come with concept and say these are the right concept and this is the right way to understand them, because it's not as simple as that. So here we have to come with a very deep understanding and to try to decenter ourselves from here, from our own universe of reference. And this is the discussion also about democracy, if we promote principles and we understand the relativity of the models and the historical dimension and evolution of these models in specific countries. And then we also have a discussion which is central in all our discussion here, is sometimes the use. I spoke right now about the separation of powers, but some of the religious authority, it could be the current power or the opposition, the resistance to this power, are sometimes using the religion in order to say this is the true reference. We are more to get some legitimacy, in fact, in their opposition or in their taking over in their power. And sometimes we see that the political project is used by referring to, for example, a certain way of reducing the Sharia to the penal code, for example, and to say, okay, we are implementing the true Islamic project because we are implementing one part of the judiciary system or the penal code. And this is very dangerous because it's in fact the instrumentalization of all the inspiration or what I said, all the principles helping us to build a social and political project in something which is reduced to the visible aspect of the authority of the Islamic structural political system. It's really dangerous, and this is why I am and still promoting this, and it's now working, and I can see that people are thinking of it, that we have to stop this use, for example, of the penal code to say this is an Islamic project, while we start by implementing unjust and unacceptable chastisements towards whom, in fact, at the beginning, not the biggest liars or betrayers or of our religion, but the poor and the women. And in fact, we are using the legal dimension or some of the most visible aspect of what Islam appears to be for the average Muslims to say this is the true Islamic project. In fact, the true Islamic project, meaning by that the true political project inspired by our ethics as Muslims, is democratization and more social justice, meaning that we cannot start and we cannot implement today this very literalist understanding of the penal code, because this is, first, at the beginning it was connected to very strong conditions that we are not respecting, and then we have to come to understanding of the objectives, not the literalist understanding, but the objectives of this implementation. And this is the problem we have with some Muslim leaders instrumentalizing this reference to say this is the Islamic way and this is the implementation of the Islamic ideal. And I think that we have to be very critical. It's part of the whole discussion. My conclusion here, very quickly in 2 minutes, is really to say that having said that and having just tried to show that there is not this conflicting realities and conflicting, these are mainly two conflicting perceptions, but when you come to the deep discussion you understand that there are common ground and we have common principles, and that the people can build out of these common principles something which is a better democratization and democratic process. But as someone who is living in the West, I'm a Western Muslim, and I lived in Europe, I know the States, I know how it's going on now. We also have to learn from our Western experience, because democracy is not only a political project, it's also a practical experience that we are experiencing every day, and it's always in need of improvement, because we know that we are always in danger. When today we are in our democratic society and we see that there are more and more politics of fear, ideology of fears, that security policy, and we see our rights being reduced in such a way that we are not sure that we are respected as citizens, or heard as citizens. We also have to come with a very strong critical approach towards the democratic process in our society, not against the democratic process, but in the name of the true democratic process, because we are in danger, because it could be that we are speaking about an ideal project when it comes to speak to Muslims in their Islamic majority countries, but forgetting that what we are experiencing in our societies, it's really could be very dangerous. 3 things, and I end with this. The first thing which is in danger is the political awareness, that we have citizens now much more obsessed with their rights than with their duties towards the community. Political awareness means that if I am a citizen in a community, I know that I have something to give, not only to take, it's not only my rights, it's also my responsibility to build. So the political awareness that there is something that I have to do for my community, my society, is something which is essential. More individualism is less democracy. Is something which is really important. So sometimes we are forgetting that we need this kind of critical approach. The second is also something which is really important, that we need civic education. Many of our citizens, and by the way, when I'm speaking to European Muslims or American Muslims or any kind of Muslims, I am saying that you need to get civic education. I should say that exactly the same for all my fellow citizens. We need civic education, because if you don't know how the institutions are working, you don't know how it's working at the local level, at the national level, you know nothing about the international process, you are a citizen without knowledge, and a citizen with ignorance is not a true citizen. Ignorance and citizenship are not marching together. So this is something that we have to do, and we have also to be critical. Third danger is the power of the media. When we have all these surveys, now I'm facing, for example, the French election, and we see all these surveys and directing you. It's as if you are voting for an image, for a picture, and not for a program, not for ideas. And this superficial commitment towards, politics is something that can be damaging, because media are very powerful and they are shaping, not completely, but it's a danger. So how do we promote a critical approach towards information, towards the news, towards the media? This is something which is part of the new conditions to get true democracy in our society, and it helps us to go beyond fears, because we are all in danger of something which is coming everywhere, and it's very, very scary. Populist discourses, and populist discourses and democracies are not going together, because in fact at the end of the day, if the populist discourses are gaining, it means that the democratic awareness is diminishing, and I think that we are all in danger of this. So let us speak about the possible coming together to a better understanding that Islam is not, or the mainstream understanding in Islam is not against the democratic process and democratic principles, but at the same time, let us be very critical about our own societies in danger or forgetting the conditions to implement in the right way our common principles. Thank you.
What a wide-ranging and provocative presentation it was. We've got a lot of questions and not all that much time, about a half an hour. So I'll try to get through as many as possible with your help, because there's a lot of interest in the themes you addressed. One of the themes that grows out of the questions, I think, is summarized in one of the questions, which is, what should a Muslim do when God's law conflicts with human law?
Okay. You want me to respond straight away?
Why don't you respond straight away, as briefly as possible, so we can get through quite a few.
With this question, okay. Very quickly. No, I think that, I got this answer, and when I started to work on to be a European Muslim, this was something which was at the beginning, when we have our laws coming from our religion, and they are conflicting with the laws created by man. And I think that this is much more a theoretical discussion than a true one, because when it comes to what is in the Quran, for example, the verses, and we are extracting from the Quran rules and prescriptions. This is what we are doing. We know from the very beginning this was the case, and in all these prescriptions there are a flexibility, and there are more than one interpretations very often, and there is a flexibility. On the other side, when it comes to the latitude within the realm of the law created by man or set by human beings, there is also a latitude. And in fact, it's not right that we have so many conflicting areas. And this is why I'm very often asking the people, give me an example. One example when a law of God, for example, is conflicting with something which is created by the human intellect. And you will see that, in fact, the flexibility on one side and the latitude on the other side is helping us to find a way to be at the same time faithful to the principles and living with our time. It's true in the Western societies, but it's true in our contemporary world, and I don't see it as something which is a real conflict. Really, the best way to deal with it is to come with an example, and we'll see that it's not really a legal question that we are facing, or there is no solution. There are always solutions that we can't find.
Well, that leads to an issue that I know you've addressed within the French context, and that is addressed here in a couple of our questions. A specific case of your call for a moratorium on corporal punishment, stoning for adultery, and the like. Your call for moratorium, and the question reads, a call that was met with criticism from the left, which said it did not go far enough, and the right, which claims that these penalties are sacred and not open to negotiation. How do you respond to these criticisms, and can you clarify your position?
Yes, first, really, it's to be my position is to be understood from within, and this is why I said you sometimes have to decenter yourself from your own universe and reference, and to enter within the universe of reference of the other. For example, as a Muslim, what I'm saying is, yes, I know, for example, that for some Muslims it was too much. I was modernizing Islam and selling out. And for Westerners it was not enough. It should have been condemned. And my position is this one. Look, when you come to the text, you will find text dealing with death penalty in the Quran and the prophetic tradition, dealing with corporal punishment, the Quran and the prophetic tradition, and stoning in the prophetic tradition only. I come with this text, and I cannot deny that there are texts. Now my position is, look, there is a problem here because the content of the text, we don't agree on it. The conditions to implement this text, we don't agree on it. The context within which this has to be implemented, we don't agree on it. So now there is a deep discussion to open on what are the texts saying, what are the conditions, in which context. So while we open this discussion, we stop everything because the conditions are not respected, and we all know that today what is done with this penal code is to be used against the poor and the women. It's not something which is just respecting the slightest dimension of justice. It's pure injustice and betrayal of the Islamic teaching. So I'm talking as a Muslim scholar to Muslim scholars, telling them, come and open a discussion and be courageous enough to say that the way we are dealing with this today, we are silent because we are scared to say the truth, and just even to promote a better understanding of our religion. So what we have to do now is, as Amnesty International is doing it in your country, in the States, they are asking for a moratorium on death penalty in some states because they know that they cannot just stop it now. So because the people are not going towards abolition. So in order to open a debate, we first take this decision. My position is that they are not implementable, but I want the Muslims to open a discussion from within, and while we have this discussion, the best is a moratorium. But let me tell you something, for those who think it's not enough. It's easy to be in the States and to say I'm against it, but you are not changing the mentality. But when you challenge the people on their own understanding of their own scriptural sources, and you say, look, the way you are reading this is wrong because you are just reading it literally without respecting the conditions, and it means that you are killing poor and women because they are poor and women, and you are not just respecting the rights. This is not Islamic. You are challenging them in their own terms of reference, and they can understand this. But to say I condemn because I think it's not right, it's against human rights, and you talk to the people from outside the universe of reference, they are not going to listen. And by the way, in Morocco I talked to 40 scholars, in Jordan exactly the same, in Indonesia, and now I'm in discussing this with some scholars in Pakistan, and they understand it from within. It takes time, but it is the only way to change mentalities. So let us be deep in our discussion, patient as to the results, but committed as to the process.
Thank you. Another set of questions deals with democracy in Muslim-majority countries and in the Arab world in particular. And several revolve around the question of whether the problem is Islam or whether the problem is traditional autocratic patriarchic structures. I'll just read one question in particular that gets at these issues. is there any inherent reason why so many Muslim-majority countries have had authoritarian forms of government? Is this because of or in spite of Islam?
I think it's the first thing to do with this is really to have an overall vision of what the Islamic world is all about, or the Islamic majority countries. Because we very often reduce the Islamic experience or the Islamic world to the Middle East or the Arab countries. Yes, the Arab countries have a problem with democracy, but it's not the case, for example, in Senegal. It's not the case in Turkey. It's not the case in Indonesia. It's not the case in Malaysia. There are some countries where the democratic process is not perfect, but it's there. There is something which is better than other countries. Even with all these deficiencies, there is something which is a process that we have to promote or at least to consider. Now, in the Islamic Arab countries, that there is a problem here because but it's not intrinsically Islamic. It has to do with the historical experience after the independences, after and the kind of regimes we have there. It means that we have to be critical, and we have to say that this is pure betrayal of our Islamic teachings, and it has nothing to do with Islam, because on both sides you have the governments who are misusing our religion, and at the same time you're resistant groups that are also trying in the name of Islam to resist this misuse of religion. And I think that we have to be critical on both and to say, look, the only way it's really to promote a civil society and to promote democratic processes and to be critical with all the countries, but it means also with some of the petromonarchies, because it's easy to be for democracy in Iraq or in Niger and less in petromonarchies with which we have some geostrategic interests. And I think that we also have to say on our side that this has nothing to do with Islam. It's not intrinsically within Islam, even though there is something which should be and must be said. Some interpretations, literalist interpretation of Islam or traditionalist interpretation of Islam are preventing these countries to promote something which is a democratic process, or to open the floor, to open the discussion for the people. That's true. I think that there are some religious resistances not helping the process, but there are political reasons mainly that are not helping. It's coming from these countries, but it's also coming from us. But because there is a lack of consistency between in the West. We promote democracies, but we are ready to speak with any kind of dictatorships protecting our geostrategic interests, and this should be said as well.
Thank you. Another set of related issues pertains to the relationship between universal human rights discourse and Islam, in particular the question of religious freedom, whether religious freedom as understood in the West, including the freedom to convert and to convert others, is compatible with Islam. And here's a specific question out of the Egyptian context. How would you recommend Muslim societies, Egypt for example, address the law of apostasy while staying faithful both to democracy, human rights, and to their Muslim values?
It's a very important question. I wanted to come to this question in our third lecture the day after tomorrow, because it's connected also with our relationship with Christianity. But I can say something about it now, which is really important. Some of our countries are having this kind of very strict legislation on apostasy, showing that here we do not accept for someone to change his or her religion. In fact, from the 8th century onward, we had scholars, and one of the most important ones is Sufyan al-Thawri, saying that there is nothing in the Quran about this, that you cannot change your religion. And it's coming from two different prophetic traditions, and one of the two is not so authentic. It's not completely weak, but it's not authentic. It's not taken into account by Muslim. And the other is connected to a very specific context. And here we have something which is a disagreement among the Muslim scholars on this, that not all, it's true that the majority trend was you cannot change your religion. But in fact, there was from the beginning, the 8th century, a trend of Muslim scholars saying you can change your religion because the Prophet never killed someone because he or she changed her or his religion first. Second, it was a situation of war when we have people changing their religion to come into the Muslim community to gather some information and to go back. They were in fact war betrayers. And then it never happened. In the book I wrote on the Prophet's life, I came with these stories showing that the Prophet never did that, and that he knew that at least 3 people changed their religion at that time, and he did not act against them, that he respected their choices, and someone was alive and living in Abyssinia. So there is something which here is not the only Islamic position on this, and I think a country like Egypt would be more faithful to the Islamic principles, not but preventing the people from changing the religion by respecting the dignity of each single citizen in this country, which is not the case now. So I really think that on this discussion, my position is clear that there is not only one position. My position is that there is nothing in Islam preventing someone, a woman or a man, to change his or her religion out of a sincere, and it's something which is personal, no compulsion in religious matters. And then there is something which is not new, once again, is very old, but we have to be clear on our position, because that's true. At the end of the day, it has to do also with freedom of choice.
Thank you, Tariq. Several of the questions resonated with debates going on in the United States about the relationship between religion and democracy, so-called values issues. And one of those is gay marriage. And 2 questions specifically target the issue of Islam and gay marriage, and whether you can imagine an evolution within Islam that would make it or parts of it compatible with the institution of same-sex marriage.
This is a deep, not an easy discussion, because we are touching something which is essential. Let me put things in order. First, the religious teaching in Islam, as well in fact as in Christianity or in Judaism, is not promoting homosexuality. In fact, the perception is here that the divine project is not a man for a man, a woman for a woman, is a man for a woman for a man. This is the perception from within the text and the readings, that this is the divine project, what he, the one, wants for human beings. So there is something which is, it will be impossible or quite difficult to find discourses relying on the religious teachings promoting homosexuality as something which is part of the religion. So on the legal framework, you won't find something which is accepting legally something which is a gay marriage or adoptions or things like that. And I don't think that the American Muslim citizens are going towards this direction. Having said that, there is something which is in our democracies and in our living together in our societies, not only in the West, but by the way, it's also, I was against what happened in Egypt against the homosexuals, the way the government used them just to legitimize its position on the Islamic field as the government protecting the Islamic values and just condemning people, is, I think, something which should be clear in the way we are citizens and we live together. Meaning by that I may disagree or not promote the way of life you decide for yourself in the private sphere. So there is something which is what you decide to do, what you decide to live, what you decide for yourself is your choice. So I may disagree with this or not promoting it, but I respect who you are, even if I disagree with what you are doing. And I think that in pluralistic society everywhere, we should not come on every single dimension to promote a legal framework for gay marriages. I don't think see it happening in the Islamic majority countries or even among the Western Muslims. I think that this will be a very minority trend. But we cannot stop here. We have to educate the people to tell them, look, you may not accept it legally, and as a citizens you have the right to say, I don't want legal acceptance of this. It's not my vision of life. You are free to say that. But having said that, and struggling for what you think is the right way, there is one thing which is really essential here: respect the people for who they are, even though you don't agree with what they are doing. This is what I expect for someone who is just looking me practicing my religion. He may disagree or she may disagree with me on what I am doing. I ask them to respect who I am. And I think that this is something which is, not everything is a legal issue, but within the legal dimension we need to have something which is a sense of dignity and sense of self-respect and mutual respect.
Thank you, Tariq. Fortunately, the satellites are moving out of their orbits, and we're going to have to cut off our conversation for today. We've covered a lot of ground. There's still a lot of questions here that we can hopefully integrate into the sessions tomorrow and Thursday. Tomorrow, I hope you'll be able to join us for a continuation of the conversation around the topic of Muslim minorities in Western Europe, their status, their growing engagement in civil society and politics, some of the controversies it has engendered. Think of the veil controversy in France, the Muhammad cartoon controversy, and so on. So we'll start tomorrow again at 10:30 a.m. Please come back and spread the word, and join me here in conclusion in thanking Tariq for sharing his ideas with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tom.